The Final Fantasy VII Rebirth demo is finally upon us for the public to consume freely. Of course, I couldn't help myself, so I downloaded this thing in order to see what Square has planned for fans. Today we're going to talk about it, and I'll give you my impressions. For my general feelings about the remake as a whole, you can check out my recent video concerning Remake and Rebirth that I published a couple of weeks ago. I'm not going to go into every single detail of this demo, but there will obviously be spoilers at times related to Final Fantasy VII. Now, at first I was a bit confused in relation to how this game starts. I had completely forgotten the sequence of events that happens in relation to Cloud and the party during the intermission DLC. That is to say that they hitch a ride with Chocobo Bill once they escaped Midgar and therefore are already at Calm. There's no traveling to Calm or anything of that nature. The game simply begins with Cloud relaying the memory of Nibelheim to the rest of the team. Even stranger is the choice of the literal opening scene for Rebirth, a sort of quick recap of the last few moments of Remake in which it shows Cloud and party escaping in the bike and truck, Midgar in total chaos due to the Whispers, and flashes of the encounter with Sephiroth. I don't really like this, but it is what it is. At this point, the screen fades out and we're immediately taken into the Nibelheim flashback with Barrett speaking in order to prompt Cloud to tell the whole story. We're treated to the vehicle scene in which Cloud and Sephiroth are traveling along the road in the rain. I think this scene is done really well and shines a light on how well some of these sequences are translated into this new engine from the old game. This isn't the last time I'll compliment the cinematography as it pertains to the events being showcased in this demo. As in 7, the vehicle is stopped as creatures appear upon the road, leaving Cloud and Sephiroth to deal with them. In the original game, Sephiroth felt exceedingly powerful, far beyond that of the player in this sequence. He could cast very high-level magic and did amazing physical damage, and while he still does both of those, the disparity with Cloud doesn't seem as strong, particularly as the demo proceeds. This is partly because the player is able to take control of Sephiroth for significant periods of time in this demo, whereas in the original game, this was the only sequence in which players could see how Sephiroth performs directly. Suffice to say, I think the overall message of overwhelming power for Sephiroth is not portrayed here as well as it was in the original game, but not a huge deal. After a short sequence in the current time with the party, we're taken to Nibelheim proper. There's a short dialogue sequence mirroring the original game very well as the Shinra team arrives, and then we're able to explore the town as Cloud. There are a few things that can be done here, such as climbing the water tower or entering Tifa's house. If you enter Tifa's house, you can play the piano minigame, and I really rather enjoyed it. I found myself humming along to Tifa's theme as I played, and decided I'd really like to see quite a bit of sheet music to find in the full game. I think the way in which they've presented the sequence is nearly perfect. Prompting Cloud when he enters Tifa's house, checks her wardrobe, and so on, is done just as in the original game, and it works out well. While on the subject of music, I'd like to mention that it seems incredible. The musical score was absolutely not a complaint I had with VII Remake, and it seems like they're just going to take it to a completely new level in this title, as it feels both nostalgic and fresh at the same time. Even better than the visit to Tifa's is Cloud's visit to his mother's house. I think this scene was translated so perfectly to this modern engine. It feels like you are watching the exact same scene, and I love everything about it. Recreation of some elements of the original Final Fantasy VII is what these remakes do a phenomenal job with. There's no doubt of that in my mind. After meeting with our guide, Tifa, and setting out, we discovered that the path up to the reactor has become quite a bit larger in terms of playable area. This makes some sense, as in the original pre-rendered backgrounds were fairly large when climbing up the mountain landscape, and being that it's the opening sequence of the game, it makes sense to spread it out a little bit for sort of a tutorialized zone for combat and basic mechanics. I don't really have any problem with this outside of a couple criticisms. The combat system has changed a bit from Remake, but I can't quite put my finger on it. For one, the camera seems to stay significantly farther back by default, and I haven't really adjusted to that yet. It makes it more difficult to see exactly what is going on at times with all the particle effects and so forth. There are options to adjust the camera distance, but unfortunately it can only be increased whether it's in field or combat. There is no option to further decrease the distance. Cloud's basic moveset has also been modified somewhat, which gave me a bit of a disorientation when trying to deal with flying enemies at first, though I think I'll come to be comfortable with it in time. For the first while, you'll only be controlling Cloud until a certain point in which Sephiroth joins as a playable character. Regardless, the combat was one of the better features in Remake, and I fully expect that to remain true going into Rebirth. After some time of heading up the mountain path, the party will encounter a broken bridge and have to squeeze through a crevice, and shortly thereafter they will come across a Mako measuring facility. This is new to Rebirth, and I'm not sure it adds much, but it's not a huge drag either, so I'm neutral on this. What I'm not neutral about is the weird minigame or time waster they've added to this facility, the Mako cleanup. You'll encounter a couple of areas that have these Mako spills along the floor, or rather gas actually, and what can be described as a sort of vacuum machine nearby. I got flashbacks to driving a forklift in Shenmue while maneuvering the machine to buff the floors basically. It's a really slow moving machine and just seems like a total pace killer that doesn't really add anything to the experience. It gets even more fun later when you're restricted by the cord length, so you have to walk it around another area to reach the final bit of cleanup. It's just a bizarre choice in terms of an addition to the game. Once you make it through the facility, you'll come to the big bridge, and we all know what happens here. In this case, it's stricken by lightning and breaks in half, leaving everyone to fall into the river below. Cloud and Sephiroth succeed in saving Tifa and one of the Shinra soldiers, but the other flows down the river. While we're here, I'd like to point out how god-awful the water looks. It just doesn't look good. I can't blame them for not putting a lot of effort into this, as the amount of times we'll be in water for this whole series is effectively nil, but it just looks bad. I'm not usually one to gush over visuals, and this even stood out to me, so I'm sure those obsessed with fidelity are certain to notice how bland the water appears. Either way, once this sequence is over and you have regrouped, this is the moment Sephiroth joins you and becomes fully playable. While you can't adjust his materia, he is pretty loaded with various elemental materia and plenty of magnify in order to significantly boost his power. At this point in the demo, you'll start to find an awful lot of materia lying about. It seems this time around we're going to have a lot more materia to choose from when building our characters, and I can't complain too much about that. The materia always felt a bit limited in Remake, and if the amount and variety of materia they hand out in this intro sequence is any indication, it seems they've taken that criticism to heart. I really do hope they bring back the old method of materia functionality. That's to say, when you master a materia, a new one is born. This was always one of my favorite aspects of Final Fantasy VII, and I was saddened to see that it wasn't present in the remake. I'm sure some might say that this could affect balance if materia could be infinitely spawned. To that I would simply say, make the final tier very expensive in terms of AP for materia that could lead to a lack of balance. That way the feature is still in the game, but it's not realistic to encounter it while just playing through. I need my baby materia. Somewhat unsurprisingly, they've added a boss encounter to this flashback. It seems that we're fighting something akin to the Materia Keeper, though its actual name in Rebirth is the Materia Guardian. I don't feel strongly either way about this. It's fine that they've included this, though I wonder if when the party encounters the Materia Keeper later in the story, if it will be replaced with another boss, or if this is a sort of generic enemy boss type that we can expect to find in reactors and whatnot throughout the games as they go. After beating the Materia Guardian, the player makes their way to the reactor at long last. Sephiroth and Cloud enter the reactor, and things go about as you'd expect. Sephiroth experiences the early stages of his mental crisis, and Cloud just takes it all in, wide-eyed. The scene is done fairly well and seems to accurately reflect what transpired in the original game. Shortly after that, we're back in Nibelheim to seek out Sephiroth, who has holed up in the Shinra mansion, and while it looks nice at first, it somewhat bothers me for some reason that you access the lower lab levels through an elevator. I'm not sure why, but I expected the old spiral staircase and whatnot, though it's not a huge deal. Some changes have to be made to better represent areas in the 3D space, and it's a minor detail. I really enjoyed the whole sequence in the library below. Visually it looks on point and depicts the original sequence to the letter for the most part. While I don't think it exactly captures the feeling of the original, it's a pretty good emulation, and I imagine it will be received well. What happens afterwards, though, I'm not as big of a fan. Sephiroth completely loses it and heads out towards Nibelheim, with Cloud following shortly thereafter, only to find the entire town engulfed in flames. Of course, not long after leaving the mansion, Cloud has several wooden beams fall conveniently on top of him in order to bring the speed of the player character to an absolute crawl. I get what they're trying to do here, to raise the tension and so forth, but the execution falls really flat for me. Insult is added to injury when you're almost, ever so slowly, reaching your target, only to have debris fall and block the remaining short distance, leaving Cloud to walk all the way around a building and beyond to get back to that area. It's just too slow. Look, he's even going faster when he crouches to get through small spaces than he is when he's limping along. Once the well falls, Cloud does pick up a little more speed, and honestly, it's enough that if the whole sequence was at this speed, I'd probably be fine with it. but focusing on how slowly I have to move really takes me out of the moment. Either way, once you make your way through the exceedingly slow walking sequence, you're treated to yet another extremely slow sequence, crawling upon the floor towards Sephiroth. This one I actually like just fine. I like the pressurized feel of the triggers as you attempt to crawl forward, and in this case there's something worth seeing that Cloud is climbing towards. I can imagine for many this entire sequence didn't go over that well, but I'm sure there are just as many who didn't mind at all. As you can tell, I fall in the middle of those groups. I think this sequence was visually interesting and ends on a great note, that famous moment when Sephiroth turns and walks into the flames. Rebirth does one thing really well. It makes me feel, again, like they are recreating Final Fantasy VII. It gets me excited in the same way that the demo for Remake did, thinking this is Final Fantasy VII. To put it in simpler terms, they nicely prepared and lubed me up for the inevitable rug pull that will be Rebirth, just like they did with Remake. It creates the most mixed feelings I can imagine. On one hand, I'm enjoying so much the recreation and new presentation that this game is being given, but in the back of my mind, I know that this story is going to go completely off rails with their liberal interpretation of what they can do with the story, considering that this is a reboot or a sequel and not an actual remake of Final Fantasy VII. While disappointing and frustrating, that's where we are at this point. The reality is that these titles are still better modern Final Fantasies than something like 15 or 16, even if it is butchering the original. I primarily mean that in terms of gameplay mechanics. In Final Fantasy XVI, the RPG elements are so stripped out as to be barely noticeable. In addition, there are no elemental weaknesses or affinities or anything of that nature. So in that regard, I think the remakes do excel. That said, there's a lot to like about Rebirth. There's some great cinematography to be found in this demo, with many excellent camera angles and wonderful presentation in terms of the original content that this game is based on. The storytelling that Cloud provides is interesting and in line with what I'd expect. Alternatively, there are things that stood out to me that hindered the experience, aside from the aforementioned pre-knowledge that the train will eventually derail. Moving around the world and the verticality is nice, but the ascending and descending animations are pure jank. I don't know that I really care about this, but I do notice it very often. The Mako vacuum makes me concerned about what other sorts of mandatory filler may be present in the final game. Visually though, this game is quite the decent looker. I think it performs well in both graphics and performance mode, though performance mode is noticeably smoother, obviously, when panning the camera and such. I played it through on both modes, but I'd be fine with either one. As mentioned, some of the scenes and areas have been carefully recreated in a way that look very accurate for the most part, and the models look pretty great. Generic NPCs still don't look so wonderful, but some sacrifices have to be made, I suppose. It doesn't really bother me, and I think the game looks great, especially considering the alleged scope of the title. Overall, I enjoyed the demo well enough, but find myself greatly concerned for the direction they will invariably take the story. It tears open that wound from VII Remake all over again and afresh, pouring even more salt upon it. If you enjoyed this quick look at the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth demo, please feel free to give it a like. If you have opinions you'd like to share about the original Final Fantasy VII, Remake, or Rebirth, drop a comment below. While I don't always cover newer titles and focus mainly on older games, feel free to subscribe in order to let me know that this kind of content is worth the effort, and perhaps I'll do more. Until next time.